Hassan Al-Saied. This is the Elif podcast. If my guests would like to introduce themselves, please, just by name.
Assalamu alaikum, everybody. My name is Jaffer Ladak, and some people might know me more as Sheikh Jaffer Ladak, and I think my friends call me SJL.
Nice. That's a good nickname. And yourself?
Assalamu alaikum, everybody. My name is Hassan Ahmad, Manchester based. Not born and bred, but Manchester based.
It's good to have you on. The topic today is mainly concerning education, higher education in particular, and career changes, or the professionalism of career changes. Just in the context of what we're talking about today, could you guys give me a quick description about yourselves, background to do with yourselves?
SJL first.
Save the best till last then, I guess.
Of course.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. So I left school only completing my GCSEs. I started my AS levels, but I didn't finish them. In fact, I finished only the first few months of my first year of AS levels. Education wasn't really going well for me. I was getting into a lot of trouble at school, and actually got arrested a couple of times. Was sadly involved in gangs, and even though I enjoyed certain aspects of education, for whatever reason, life just wasn't going in that direction. And my elder brother basically said that either I was, going to die, be killed, or something crazy was going to happen to me, and convinced my father, who is, or was at that time, the icon of traditionalism, that I should go into university and become an engineer or something like that. My brother convinced him that I should leave school and join my brother in the world of work. And actually he was in the world of recruitment, medical recruitment specifically. I did join him, and then a couple of years later we started our own medical recruitment agencies where we were supplying doctors to the NHS. And after a few more years after that, the number of agencies that were in our group grew, and alhamdulillah, our businesses were doing almost 80 million a year turnover.
Alhamdulillah.
But during that period, I had different roles, sales director and also academy director, training incoming recruitment consultants. But actually, Islamic studies started to take an interest, or I started to take an interest in Islamic studies, and the world of work was seeming less and less interesting to me, and I was actually pulling away to doing more Islamic studies. Eventually, I left my businesses, sold my shares, and went to the Hawza Ilmiya, first one Al-Mahdi Institute in Birmingham, and then later to the Hawza of Karbala, and then returned back to the UK to take up different roles in the UK. Because I'd actually missed out on a lot of formal education in the UK, when the opportunity came to do a master's degree, I entered back into the education field and got an MA in Islamic law from ICAS through Middlesex University. So my journey has been quite meandering, I think, when it comes to this. But I've got a bit of a foot in one camp of the business experience, but also another foot in the camp of formal education as well.
Of course. Very radical way of getting there as well. MashaAllah. And yourself, Hassan?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Unfortunately, I don't have anything quite as exciting and inspiring to say of my background, but that's probably a good.
It's probably not true.
Probably good in terms of a start.
We're only sitting here because we're inspired by you.
Yeah.
Because of the stark difference. But I mean, it gets more interesting towards the end. In terms of the start, I would say I started very traditional kind of way I progressed through education, firstly through high school, then into university. Actually, University of Manchester, studying computer science with business. That was in 2002, and I graduated in 2006. After that, I went and became a software engineer in data and software, working in data and software. In 2010, I took the jump out of employment and into the freelance world, which was kind of a big jump at the time because it was kind of very risky. I've not really taken that many risks up until that point. Everything was play it safe. So 2010, I became a freelancer. And since then, 15 years, I've been very self-taught. I've taught myself new technologies, new skills continuously, work to find new clients, new business, And then 5 years ago, 6 years ago, I started to engage in this idea of going into startups. So that's when I tried and I failed a couple of startup ideas. So we'll talk about failure hopefully later on, and how that's a good thing, not a bad thing, which is something you grow up hearing the opposite of. And then, so till now, and then a couple of years ago, we launched this health tech startup, which is actually a similar space to, interestingly, similar space to Sheikh Jaffer's business and professional background. It's around recruitment, but more like staffing and in healthcare through technology. So it's a similar space, but it's all technology driven. And that was launched 3 years ago, and we've been working on it since. So that's kind of a startup which is going. It's been working, and that's what got me to here today.
Thank you so much for sharing a very quick, feels like a quick description of what you guys have been up to. I'm sure there's much more to it, and we'll unpack that inshallah during this podcast. There's a range of questions that we've got for the both of you, of course, and I'd like to hear your thoughts and opinions on these topics. The first being something that's kind of dear to my heart as someone that's a bit younger from you two. What would you say is the future? And this is a question: what is the future of learning for young Muslims in the UK? And that could mean in terms of formal education, as you guys have briefly spoke on before, and also in terms of their careers as well, in their entrepreneurialism as well.
Sheikh Jaffer, you go first, please.
Open-ended question, by the way.
The future of learning for the Muslim community, actually, I think we need to take a step back and just reflect on the idea that we're in a period now where we can very much reassess the systems of learning that we've got in front of us. And those are both in the formal settings as well as even in our own community. The way in which we convey Islamic education as well as secular education. There have been so many good groundbreaking works that are available for educationalists and Muslims to be able to take advantage of. So in the classical works, you've got things like Pedagogy of the Oppressed by Paulo Freire, a brilliant work, which queries that whether the system has actually been designed to be able to assist the rich, the super rich, get even richer, powerful get more powerful at the expense of the ordinary individual, and whether the learning is actually in a system of what he calls like the banking system of learning. You just deposit knowledge and you take it out, and there's nothing more beyond that. Or, for example, you've got Ivan Illich's great book on deschooling society. And he argues that we don't actually need schools in the way in which we've become accustomed to, but there should be a much more diverse understanding of on-the-job training, speciality, focus. So, one of the great questions that we have right now is how is it that you can put 30 kids of the same age, of the same grade, in the class together for 5 days, 8 hours a day, for so many years, and go at exactly the same pace? The amount of diversity that's come into that's available for children to be able to learn at, whether we need to rethink the model. So these discussions have always been there, and therefore the Muslim community could start thinking about its own education models and the way in which they want to drive the conversation, or the way in which their own schools are able to become a little bit more innovative, and the way in which they can actually drive a little bit of systemic change as well. And then you come inside the question of the actual Muslim community and the way in which they're learning, especially their own religion. And especially for someone who has the opportunity to sit on the pulpit, my gripe has long been that the different forms of learning are not being taken advantage of. We generally have a very pedagogical approach to learning, and we don't take advantage of, say, auditory, visual, kinesthetic learning. Very little of that is available inside the majlis. From time to time, I know that Hassooni's come to majlis, Jaffer sitting in the audience has kindly come to the majlis. And I think what's central is that we try to make sure that there's videos, that there's PowerPoint presentation. Normally, I would ask everyone to bring their own Quran and they can annotate it. So Muslim learning, or at least the way in which there's an opportunity to shift direction, is very much available and open to us. The question is whether we've actually thought about the different models of education that we want to be employing. And I would start with just that point of conversation. Do we know what the different models of learning are? How we can begin to apply those within the Muslim space that can then drive change externally as well as internally. This is something that's just been in my mind for a long time.
So you feel that there's a lack of inclusivity within the educational model of the Islamic one, that it's helping young students, helping young people to kind of come together, and it's not just being about the pedagogical type of way. I think there's a lack of inclusivity in terms of
There's a lack
teaching
of inclusivity in the forms of learning. So people learn in different ways. Some people are more visual aid learners. Some people are more kinesthetic learners, where they need to be able to touch something. Some people are more group learners. And what's happening at the moment is we're shifting much more to an online space for learning. So when you have kind of the traditional model of learning, which is where you yourself as an individual are learning, and then you shift it to the online, that's known as asynchronatic, where you need to write a paper and I'll review it. Whereas there's a much more syncretic kind of learning where we're getting together in groups, we're learning from each other's speciality. Like we're doing at the moment, Hassouni will come in and he will teach us and I will teach. And actually there's an opportunity to shift the way in which we're learning. And I think if the mosques take advantage of that, then the Muslim community could be a little bit ahead of the game, especially when it comes to religious denominations and the forms of learning.
Thank you for sharing. Hassan, any thoughts on this? Or
There's quite a lot actually
to
to try and get into detail with this topic. I mean, we're here on a podcast, right? I would have never imagined myself 10, 15 years ago being here, and this is a way that I'm now picking up and learning knowledge from lots of different topics and different teachers. So in the technology space, for example, podcasts now are big. If you want to learn about business startups, you want to learn about entrepreneurship, all these topics now are kind of at your fingertips with podcasts. If you can learn so much on the go, you can learn so much in different ways now. Obviously with COVID now, the way learning takes place has come into question, hasn't it? In the last year, everyone's kind of really thought, hang on a minute. Although I'll be honest with you, with my children, they're in school, and the whole homeschooling experience has been a disaster, complete and utter disaster.
You're not the only one, I'm sure.
But even though that's the case, still the idea of how we learn and the access to learning and access to knowledge, I think that paradigm's changed and shifted in our minds, and we now start to realize, hang on, yes, there is formal education and it definitely has its place, but what is the future going to hold, and what's the actual correct model of learning? So, if we try and break down formal learning and Islamic learning, or formal education, and then kind of Islamic education, obviously there's the remote learning now. So I've seen many stories of people around the world with their children doing their GCSEs at 11 years old, 12 years old, at home, with no formal education, because their parents have instilled them in this mindset of, don't put these barriers in place that by this year I have to achieve this year I have to achieve this.
Having to follow the linear school of like 12, 13,
the linear,
14.
linear kind of route. It's been proven that, well, hang on a minute, if there's 11-year-olds achieving A stars in maths and physics, 10-year-olds in fact in some cases, then this tells me that in some ways, we need to reassess, is this educational model maybe limiting some of our youth and limiting progress or capability of human beings, because humans are evolving, they're becoming more advanced. Some children are really bright, and you're kind of almost putting them in a place where they're not thriving because you're restricting their
Everyone
ability.
has to work to an average level of everybody else, which is why I said you put 30 students into one classroom and keep them at the same pace.
Exactly. And then obviously you've got these kind of divides where you've got people going to private education and they've got people going to good schools and bad schools. And so, we have to look at maybe, homeschooling could become a big thing in the next few years, because parents think, hang on a minute, I'm going and working to pay for my 2 children to go into good schools, or to pay for a mortgage in a good area for my children to go to the school. What if I just taught them at home instead? Could I do a better job?
Or hire private tutors to do so.
Hire private, Go
outside
it's a
the
mixture,
route.
And then the physical education bit you can pay for, and you're still, you can. What I'm saying is, it's possible that there's better models for learning and bringing children up in any culture and any environment, not just the West. So that's kind of how I see formal learning changing. I think obviously there's still a big place for in-person learning. So, we shouldn't say, everything can be remote. I don't think that anything can replace that human contact and human interaction. So that has to play a part in learning and education. But to what extent, I'm not sure. This is something that's probably up for debate. In terms of Islamic education, I'm going to be a bit controversial with the Sheikh here. Maybe he can agree or disagree. I don't know.
We'll see.
We've always had this kind of view of the Islam being like a physical centric place, i.e., for example, Najaf centric or Qum centric. If you want to study Islam, you have to go to these places. I don't know if this is changed now, or it's changing, or it's evolving, that people are thinking, hang on, with the accessibility of material, with the accessibility of teachers, can you now become a learned scholar anywhere in the world? Is there that restriction that you have to go to the seminary?
There's a glint in his eye. I love this.
So that's where the Islamic education kind of aspect becomes very interesting. And then the other aspect is how we innovate and make Islamic education accessible to the next generation. Not with just lectures, but I'm sure lectures have their place and they will continue to have their place. But how do we kind of make Islamic education learning fun and engaging for the young generation, that they enjoy learning about Islam? They want to go there and they want to debate these topics and they want to understand it. And it's not just this is a fiqh ruling and that's a fiqh ruling and this is that topic and that's a history, where it becomes a living body of knowledge that they want to continuously access. So anyway, I think I've said enough on that. That's the kind of areas.
So to touch on your question directly, you feel like it's becoming more decentralized in the sense that you don't have to go to a specific mukan or place to learn these things. Is that what you're kind of asking, or was it along those lines?
What I'm saying is that the culture that we've inherited is that if you want to become a scholar and you want to become learned, you have to go to a seminary and study. Maybe that will continue, and maybe these places will continue to have an importance. But does that stop somebody becoming a learned scholar if they're anywhere in the world, given the access of knowledge is anywhere in the world, and Islam is a global religion? I guess these questions probably Sheikh Jaffer is better placed to answer and discuss.
I don't think I'm better placed, but I think the premise is so important. What we said in both cases is that if you imagine the shift that has taken place, none of us, whether it be the media and the shift to the authoritative media being online, the power of Facebook, the power of Twitter and social media, the way in which news has shifted online, the way in which now secular education is shifting online, it was always going to be the case that Islamic learning is also going to shift online. And what we are seeing is that there are a number of remote hawzat that have started to open up, right? Well Federation of the Khawaja community has just opened one. Sayyid Mahdi al-Mudarrisi has just opened his own one, online, so on and so forth. As well as all of the mainstream seminarian texts and their teachings are all available on YouTube now. You can just type in any book and you'll have a choice of 10 different teachers that have actually taught this book, and you can follow the entire series. You even have Bath Kharij available now on YouTube, and this has caused a tremor in the Muslim community, because when certain scholars are now putting out there, previously it was a closed circle, so it was always kept at arm's length. We don't get to know what the opinions of the maraji or the methodologies. It's a very inaccessible type of language. It was a very heavy language. It was full of mustalahat, and you had to go through back 10 years worth of training. If now all of this is available online, which it is, and every Tom, Dick and Harry, or Muhammad, Zaid and Bakr, or Muhammad, Ali and Hassan has access to it, we can see what practically this is actually caused. So that means that with the accessibility of knowledge, there's one more barrier that has to drop, and that's language. Because again, the majority of the Islamic learnings are in Arabic or in Farsi. So as a requisite, everybody has to go and pick up that language. Assume for a minute that even that barrier drops for whatever reason. Like you said, you have more localized scholarly learning. They are then going to produce that knowledge in the context of the English language, it revolutionizes the potential that the Muslim community can have. And instead of lectures, instead of the traditional level of understanding, which is quite low, you could actually potentially have a whole generation of kids that are growing up learning things not just at a faster pace, as you were suggesting, but their ability to navigate Islamic issues and become authoritative for their own locality will also shift as well. That will necessarily cause the decentralization of authority.
So that's a brilliant answer, by the way, just thinking about it now. Yeah, definitely. I think the times are changing, and that does coincide with just learning in itself and how it's become totally decentralized as well, be it to do with your own career and your own prospects as well. Definitely. Hassan, what have you got any questions about the tech and the stuff that you wanted to talk about? Or?
I mean, what I found, I guess, in 15 years being in technology, is that because technology is inherently online, finding knowledge and understanding, gaining technical skills, picking up coding, picking up different technologies, new skill sets is accessible to everyone. And this is something I think really important for the younger generation to comprehend, that you don't actually need to go to university and then through formal training to become a coder, to become a developer, to go into technology. And I think an important aspect of education now is that everyone needs to have some level of understanding of technology and how to implement it, whether you're going into business. So let's say you're setting up a new business in this country. The more technical knowledge you have, the more you understand data, the more you understand how systems are set up, applications, the more likely you have a chance to succeed in the business that you're setting up. Because if you have a business which is successful, it's very easy now with someone with technology to come and replicate that business, a bit of money, and to basically have a competitive edge over you through automation, and then in the coming years through AI as well. So what I'm saying is that it's very important for people to become self-taught in the area of technology, to continuously evolve their understanding of how technology is going to affect their lives, whether it's in business, whether it's in education, whether it's in their own fields. So, this idea that I don't believe in this idea anymore, where you can say, I'm going to go into medicine, I don't really care about technology. Well, hang on a minute. Your medical field is changing every day because of technology. So don't sit there and say, I'm not interested in technology, because what if your job is replaced by technology in 10 years? You must at least be aware of that's possible, right? So look, the simplest example I can give, and I'm sorry if this is there's radiographers out there already. Inshallah, I'm sure you'll adapt and be successful. But radiography is a principal example of how AI can replace a job in the next 10 years, where there'll be one machine, one radiography bot can replace 3 radiographers. So you might have 1 radiographer instead of 3, for example. And these are cost savings which a government will undertake. It will say, hang on a minute, I can either pay £300,000 out in salaries, or I can pay £100,000 out in salaries.
It's not just radiography, surgeons as well. But carry on. But it's in every field.
I'm giving you one idea, and that's one example. So what I'm saying is that people need to read about technology, read about at least at a high level how technology is implemented, what are the concepts of software development, of a life cycle of technology and software. Understand how technology is disrupting markets, disrupting business. It's continuously disrupting.
Feels like it's disrupting every 6 months now. It's like there's always some new trend, or there's always some new position made.
Exactly. And I've worked I've tried startup technology. I've tried a few and I failed at them. In that process of failure, and this is one of the things which I wanted to focus on, actually, is the discussion around failure and how the community looks down on failure in inverted quotes. That it is not a failure to try something and not succeed at it.
Mm-hmm.
What have you learned and gained in that process?
Definitely.
And what does that increase your chance of success in the long term or not?
Yeah.
And is it not? Why is that? Why is somebody trying and risking something and not necessarily succeeding in the terms we understand it. A failure, whereas somebody playing it safe, not trying anything, is deemed as success. I'm not saying that person can't be successful in their own careers and isn't working hard and so on and will be successful. But what I'm saying is that we should encourage entrepreneurship, risk taking, and even I'm sure there's a hadith which the Sheikh will back me up on in terms of how taking risks is important as well. So there's a time and place for everything, and everyone's got their own skill set and so on. But I think it's important to focus on learning and
learning in specific of technology as well.
Yeah, and learning the technology in whatever field you are. So this is kind of something which I think is relevant to everybody. That don't think that technology is something which is not something you should be interested in or shouldn't read about or understand, because everybody can understand it.
Yeah.
So then to follow up on that, given that with automation, or the potential that automation has, let's say in the second half of this century, where should the Muslim community be thinking about its educational priorities, as well as its own priority of where it can invest into as well?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, if we look globally at the trends in terms of technology, if I was to encourage the younger generation to go into a formal education and learn a specific thing or a specific part of technology, because it's such a wide area now. I always tell people, look at cybersecurity. This is a big thing now. How do we secure our data? How do we secure our information? Because now in the modern world, data is the new gold. That's where a lot of the value is held. Then you've got areas such as big data. This is actual kind of where you've got enormous amounts of data that you can mine and extract information from, which can generate wealth.
Win elections from.
Yeah.
Overthrow governments.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we have to understand them and be aware of them even more.
It's said in jest, but actually a lot of truth is said in jest. Actually,
yeah. Sorry.
A lot of truth is said in jest. Like I was joking, but actually this is a heavy part of it. So.
Definitely. So you've got cybersecurity, you've got big data.
Internet of Things is anything.
Internet of Things is up and coming area as well. So, and then obviously AI. So AI now is exponentially growing in terms of all technologies. Everyone's trying to find a use case for AI. So understanding how AI works, the algorithms behind it, is definitely something which, if we have more people in, it'll be immensely useful in the coming years.
Yeah, is it enough for young Muslimin to just care about learning latest technology and so on, or is it actually trying to develop their own businesses and really take it even the next step forward? Because it's enough to just say, for instance, to learn how to code, but what about the next step? Or why are we learning to code? What is the purpose of the ma'na for it? I think there needs to be, this is kind of a question for both of you, is if you were to sort of remodel how the education system would be, would you focus solely just on technology and obviously the other main important parts like arithmetic and so on? Or would you kind of instill that critical thinking that I do think is missing, the critical thinking skills, that I think is missing within a lot of schools of thought now? How would you, and essentially what I'm asking is, how would you remodel the education system for a lot of...
I mean, I came through the university system, and I think there's pros and cons to it, right? You're taught a lot of principles which you carry forth with you from university. It's more about the principles than actual any practical application of it. So, I think university is quite intensely theoretical. It's when you actually go into the real world that you actually learn the skill sets. Even doctors, they tell you, we go to university for 5 years. We go into our first job and we don't know anything, A lot of my friends were doctors used to say this. We actually only start learning when we first...
It's a bit worrying, by the way, but yeah.
Yeah, well, this is the reality. So higher education there's a university experience. You gain a lot from going to university. At the same time, a lot of people will argue that it institutionalizes you, and you have to. Some people say you have to even unlearn some of the things you learn at university to progress. So, this is why I'm saying we need to rethink how higher education fits into our lives, and while encourage people to study and learn and become and gain knowledge about topics which they're passionate about, we should also support those who don't go into that standard kind of way or standard route to of education and learn in different ways and maybe have a passion for a different path. So yeah, I think we should be open-minded to those ways.
Definitely.
I think from the Islamic perspective, the space that is going to be opening up over the next half century is going to be real critical debate on matters like epistemology, moral philosophy, and also the amelioration or the relationship between scholarly learning and, let's say, secular specialists. So let's just take those one by one so it becomes easier for our dear listeners to be able to digest what I mean. Traditionally, if you look at the model with the Prophet ﷺ, there was a lot of scope where he would seek out the opinions of others. وَشَاوِرْهُمْ فِي الْأَمْرِ, consult them in the affairs of the ummah. And the Prophet, with the width of his heart and how compassionate he was, he always had a very ready ear. But as we began to systematize fiqh in the times of the Imma alayhimus salam, companions became more and more reliant on seeking out the opinion of the Imam and following it to its letter. When we think about Islamic knowledge today, there has to be a real space for Islamic learning to be partnered with and learn from specialists in other fields. Hassouni has just given us a wonderful example of AI. How can Islamic sciences benefit from AI? That's actually a question that's entered into the Hawza Ilmiya maybe the last 3 years, and I don't think before that. When it comes to medical ethics, or when it comes to the relationship between the application of certain laws, we actually see a greater and greater reliance on specialists within their fields to be able to inform maraji', fuqaha, ulama of their latest learnings. Otherwise, it becomes so overwhelming, the plethora of masail that just keep coming daily in the abwab of fiqh. It becomes such a mawsu'a, such a huge encyclopedia, that without specialist knowledge assisting the development of Islamic knowledge is going to fall way behind. So in the series that we've been giving here in IUS, for example, over this last 15 nights in the month of Ramadan, we've been talking, for example, about the issue of modern-day slavery. If you are going to define slavery as it was in its historical sense, in its pre-modern sense, or even in its modern sense up until the point of 100 years ago, 200 years ago with abolition, you'll only have one image of what slavery looks like. Whereas when you have specialists in their field today, they will be able to contribute to that mas'ala in a way in which traditionally Islamic sciences would be unable to discover. I think the spaces that specialist learning can help in is specifically things like epistemological sciences, reading of texts. Moral philosophy is going to be the big one. Islamic law is soon going to partner with akhlaq and moral philosophy, and the role of reason and how reason will understand morality. If you have Muslim specialists in this field, they will be able to partner with the Hawza Ilmiya, and together we can actually move Islamic sciences forward, as opposed to kind of seeing this very separate world that exists today between academia and the Hawza. They need to become a lot closer. And when you have people who specialize in certain areas, for example, AI, we can now bring this into the Hawza field. So, for example, how can AI help us to understand a mas'ala? You might pick one mas'ala, and I'll give you an example. When you have the fiqh of, let's say you want to give something in charitable services, you want to give something as waqf, for example. And let's say now you want to be able to say, can I withdraw that thing from waqf? In the fiqh of the Shia school of thought, and also in one from the Sunni school of thought, you are permitted to be able to withdraw the waqf item if it's not being used or it's not being maximized in its best potential. Is it possible for us to be able to use AI to see where this item could actually make the most money, where it could actually become the most productive. It doesn't have to be AI. It can actually be any sort of online resource, any sort of algorithm that could help us to understand the maximization of that thing. And this becomes a tool of certainty that allows me to be able to apply a mas'ala through online learning or some sort of algorithmic learning. There's a lot of space for these worlds to come together, but it does require conversations to take place that traditionally just have not taken place at all.
And that comes deep down from all of the quintessential aspects of that is engagement within different communities of learners as well. I think that's actually trying to lead to my next question, which is both for you. What do you feel, and maybe this is straying away from the topic a little bit, what do you feel is the biggest obstacle or hindrance that young people have, or just Muslimin in general within the UK or elsewhere, have when it comes to political engagement, and why do we feel like we're so far behind when it comes to local or domestic elections or engagement with our local communities? Or the question is open for both of you to answer. It's quite a big question, I know, but I think it roots back to what we've just been talking about in a way.
I think a lot of it's cultural.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things we've grown up with is this idea that there's nothing you can do to change the political status quo. So we've been. This is what we've been taught. Really, it's like, oh, if you get involved in politics, you will become corrupt and bad. And there's no kind of middle ground of well, how do we engage politically for the wider better good? How do we, for example, engage with RMP? How do we get involved in the media? How can we make a difference? There's never really been that discussion. It's always been kind of, but that area we don't touch, kind of thing. We stay away from it. So that's kind of addressing that cultural aspect of it is important. But I think the next generation is slowly moving away from that. That's definitely one aspect. The other aspect I would say is around just education, general education of politics, understanding what politics is. There's not really much political awareness. Our community is rife with this conspiracy theory syndrome.
Do you think it comes from fear? The ultimate thing is
a lot of fear. Yeah.
Yeah.
So our communities are definitely rife with this. I'll just coin this term now: conspiracy theory syndrome.
Okay.
It's a lot of WhatsApp messages going on.
Yeah,
broadcast messages.
As soon as something happens politically, it's a conspiracy. If people are this able to manage this amount of conspiracies simultaneously and keep it under wraps, I think we call that a day and just submit to them. To be honest with you,
Yeah.
so I think these things we need to break down and make people realize that actually, what little we can do small things. There's definitely small things we can do to engage politically. There's definitely small things we can do to change the political landscape around us. And Sheikh Jaffer has given many of those examples in his lectures. So, I think charity starts at home with these things. We need to start educating, hosting, organizing, and having workshops. And breaking down these barriers. I think that's probably all I'd add on that.
Definitely.
At that point.
It's brilliant because we started with, what's our vision for education, and we said that it needs to be broad, and that the breadth actually allows us to feed into a more holistic, wholesome vision for Islam. And so politics and people who are going to be within policy making or within that sphere of community development, we also need to grow that field as well. We're still very, very disenfranchised. We are underrepresented statistically in places like Parliament and in local elections as well across the country. And then even further than that, in terms of the gender underrepresentation, the sisters of our community are even further underrepresented. So we have to do a massive realignment of that, or a real emphasis in that. So that's one thing. But now, what's really interesting, you talked about the cultural perceptions, and I really like that because from the Islamic perspective, we've gone through this massive shift. At the beginning of the 20th century, in our school of thought, it was prohibited for us to be involved in politics or policy making at the level of ulama, at the level of the Hawza Ilmiya. And then, of course, came the Iraqi constitutional crisis, the tobacco crisis with Ayatollah Shirazi. Then came the 1979 revolution in Iran. Then came Shaheed Mohammed Baqir al-Sadr. And eventually we've started to shift so far from here to here that it's gone from politics is haram for you to participate to politics is wajib for you to participate. That swing over the space of less than a century has been huge. Now that causes a trauma on a community because many people don't know where they sit. They don't know what their views are. So you get this kind of split where you get one camp still sitting here going it's haram, the other camp going it's wajib, and then there's the constant battle that's in between us.
It's another polarization, isn't it?
Yeah, it absolutely is. So part of the cultural issue is also redefining our Islamic understanding of it, and I have to really emphasize this, not based on Iran, not based on Iraq, not based on Lebanon, but based on here. Yeah? And understanding our political engagement with the landscape that we find ourselves in. Now, when you look at some of our community umbrella bodies, particularly things like MCB, they've been frozen out. I mean, that's been purposeful, that the Tory government over the last 10 years has wanted them to be seen as extreme. Because the more you can place that central body as being on the periphery, the more you get to exclude certain mainstream voices, and you get to bring in your own voices. And that's why there are a lot of shuyukh and Muslim activists that are basically puppets for the government, that just speak on behalf of the government. The Muslim community don't find them representing us, but in terms of the actual spaces that they sit in, they do, because they've just been ushered in. The Majid Nawazis of the world and some others that I'm happy to name drop Majid Nawaz, but I don't want to name drop anyone else at this moment in time. But you understand what I'm saying. So that tells us that the Muslim community is sitting, by and large, in a space that is outside of having any direct impact on the things that it wants to be able to do. And the further out you are, the more you end up screaming and shouting. Do you know what I mean? You, if I'm over here at the other side of the room, I have to raise my voice to be heard, and that makes us seem extreme. That makes us seem like the loudmouths,
out of touch as
out
well.
of touch,
Yeah.
right? So there has to be a dynamic where we can actually put ourselves back into the space, have an authentic, unapologetic Islamic vision that allows us to become a moral force and a political force into the society. What does that mean? Does that mean that we have to become part of the Conservative Party? Does that mean that we have to become part of the Labour Party? Is the future the Green Party? Do we have to create our own party? Well, the Muslims are never going to come behind that united front. So how then do we actually find a space when we're able to have an impact on society? And I think that it would start by actually having some sort of vision as to what a British Islam means, or an understanding of British Islam means.
A unified vision, in a way.
Some sort of unified vision of what it means to be a Muslim here.
Yeah.
Now, when I say British Islam, I know that some of our friends will go, Ayatollah Khamenei has said, be careful of British Islam. I don't mean that type of British Islam. I mean an authentic understanding of the challenges that we have and how Islamic principles would actually have an impact in society today. If our scholarship, if our political voices, if our upcoming generation have a space to be able to map out what that means for us, we're then in a better position to offer it to political parties, to society. The less time we actually have that, the less we have that, the more our voice becomes gobbled up within a mainstream voice, and there's no separation between a truly Islamic vision for the country, whatever that means, and the mainstream. It just becomes merged into one.
And the second order effect of that is that you create a generation of indifference as well, where people just go, actually, there's no real point of politics is BS and all that type
Completely.
of. Yeah.
And from the Islamic perspective, what Hassouni said is really beautiful as well. We feel like we can't make a change. We've been. I know he's quite sympathetic to Boris Johnson at times, or at least playing devil's advocate with me. He seems to be quite sympathetic to old Bojo. And I take the complete opposite way, as he knows. But if you just look at this last year, we all feel like we're shouting, we're screaming into the void. Like, where do we want to go next with this? When are people going to be held to account for what's happened over these last 13, 15 months of a pandemic? From the Islamic perspective, theologically, there is a power in powerlessness.
What do you mean by that? You're gonna have to break that down.
The mustada'afin, the downtrodden, are promised that they will always have the upper hand with God, and eventually, be it the short, be it the medium, be it the long term. There is a power in powerlessness. So when the community is disenfranchised, or the political system, or what's the word I'm looking for? The
Political landscape.
There's a word I'm looking for. It escapes me at the moment. But the mass audience feels like they're so disempowered and they cannot make a change. There is actually something that's bubbling underneath where there's a dissatisfaction.
Disenfranchisement?
Yeah, the electorate. I think that's the word I was looking for.
Okay, sorry.
The electorate is becoming more and more disenfranchised, and they feel like there's less power in them, but actually something's bubbling up from within them that allows them to be able to make a change. And you saw that to a small degree with the type of language that was being used around one Jeremy Corbyn. What happens if you actually find a leader as honest as him, but not so politically naive as him? Yeah? Someone who has a vision, who can draw people together, communities together. If that person was to come forward, then I think we'd be in a much stronger position. I would like to think that the Muslim community should be part and parcel of that. And that means a lot of grassroots movement. It means actually having a vision that our moral, or our ethics are at the forefront of our politics, and not just screaming from the sidelines. That's what I'd like to see.
And endorsing one of our own as well, endorsing in terms of having a movement and then we can actually back behind in terms of financially and socially and so on. That's kind of an important aspect of it as well.
Yeah, I think the financial investment into that. And then, we just talked about the importance of having Muslims in the space of AI, data mining, marketing, advertising. If we have the right people in the right place at the right time, the moral force or the moral will that the Muslim community can provide to the country could be very, very powerful.
Actually, just to add to that, the data is all important here. If everything in this modern world is data driven. Okay, so when you look at any marketplace you use, let's say you use Amazon, for example, or any app you use, if you use one of the supermarkets, or everything uses data to target the right person at the right time. So if we have people investing in this area to understand, for example, simple terms, what's the Muslim populations around the UK? How many of those Muslim populations are in which political party, are voting for which political party? Can you see how you start driving a
understanding
strategy?
Trends,
understanding a trend, understanding a strategy. Okay, so actually, if we put £2,000 into marketing here, we could achieve as much as putting £10,000 in marketing there, and that's just simple with simple data. You run some surveys online, you collect some data that's available online. You can start a process of unraveling a strategy to how you can actually make a political impact. But unfortunately, we're not that advanced.
He wants like a Mecca Analytica.
Yeah.
Instead of Cambridge Analytica.
It's a good way to put it.
Yeah, and unfortunately, now this is the way that you could say the opposition are working, or people who are working against us, the methods and tactics they're using. But I guess you have to be able to use the tools at your disposal, right? You can't sit there and say, well, we're going to use ethics and morality, and of course we have to do, but I'm saying, and ignore using technology, ignore looking at data, ignore looking at the opportunities to make an impact.
Yeah,
you can't. I mean, and this is, I think that's where a lot of people are stuck. They're like thinking, hang on, political engagement, these guys are all corrupt, they're using these tactics, we can't look at data, we can't assess our electorate, we can't assess every party, every movement knows its people, knows where they are, knows its
how to get the best out of them, how to direction them.
We don't. I don't think any Muslims have any tactics for this, or any kind of strategy funding to achieve something from this. It needs serious money. Let's to be honest with you, it needs millions of pounds, not huge amounts, because these days data is accessible relatively cheaply, and you can gather this kind of data, quite cheaply. But then the mining of it and generation of the output and the outcomes from it will take money. But I personally think that that's something we should be looking at.
Do you think then the Muslim community needs to have a strategy? When I say Muslim community, I mean, you're the heads of a community here in this region, right? And it needs to be almost top down, where there's when you go to the madrasas, when you go to the mosques, you're presenting this, and you're identifying those youth who are capable, those youth who are interested in this, those who are in the university fields right now, and putting these resources together, even if it's locally at first, before you start to move it nationally. Is that something that can be done?
I mean, I'm sure it can be done. It's whether there's appetite and the drive and the vision to do it. It's definitely something that can be done, yeah. But it's something that would obviously require a lot of work and a lot of investment. I think it's not going to be easy.
I think you've also answered your question just previously before with having a unified vision first and having that dialogue first within each other of different communities where there's different sects and so on. So, and even gender, as you mentioned before, that's an important thing. So you've got to find that first before you can have the showing and processing and investing and so on. But yeah, cool. Should we wrap it up or
Yeah, we'll wrap it up. Yeah.
Yeah, we've talked about a lot. Okay, I'll wrap it up. Do you want me to end on the? Sure. Sheikh Jaffer, get your Twitter in.
What do you mean by handle? Sorry.
Social media handles.
How can you not?
He's talking about tech all day.
He doesn't know what a handle is.
Come on, man. Your Instagram, my name is. You can find me on this. Contact me for my business. You want to promote for yourself?
I mean, I'm generally, because I'm in the technology space, I'm very active on LinkedIn.
Yeah. What can people reach out to you for? What's your business, or that they can come out to you for your services?
If you look for Peru, Pairoo, and then you'll find that on LinkedIn, and then Hassan Ahmad, if you search it, I should come up somewhere near the top, I would hope. Although there's many Hassan Ahmads in the world, but
he's paid his advertisers though.
Yeah. But yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn. If you search Peru, you'll find me on Google. Yeah, so that's what you feel free to get in touch with me.
Sheikh, what about yourself? Any Twitter?
You can normally find me at a protest with holding a placard. It depends on what the cause is, if it's anti this or if it's anti that or pro this or pro that. But online, you can probably find me on Twitter at Jaffer Ladak, JAFFERLADAK, and similarly on Instagram, same at Jaffer Ladak.
Amazing. Thank you guys so much for your time and your effort and the wonderful conversation that you have. My name is Hassan Al-Saied. You can find me on LinkedIn also, Hassan Al-Saied, ALSAEID. This has been the Elif podcast. I'd like to thank both the guests as well. And inshallah, we'll do another episode in the future. Thank you again.
Inshallah.
Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam.